Welcome to Uplifted. It is Tuesday, March 31st. I sure hope your day is going well. Look forward to getting back into our Bible study today. Of course, we are looking at a biblical recipe for maintaining a healthy spirit. And the truth is, the Bible teaches us, as we've looked at Proverbs 18, verse 14, the spirit of a man will sustain his infirmity, but a wounded spirit who can bear? We've been looking at several Bible characters and seeing exactly what was the character or the spiritual ingredients in an individual's life that helped them to have a good spirit. We've been looking at Daniel. The Bible says in Daniel chapter number 6 and verse 3, it says, "Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king thought to set him over the whole realm." The first area we looked at was that Daniel had a clean spirit, a clean heart. Daniel chapter 1 verse 8 says that Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. And the truth is, if we're going to stay clean in this old world today, it's going to be something we do on purpose. We are bombarded from every direction, not only with things that will defile us, but things that will eventually get our spirit. And so we've looked at having a clean spirit and what we can do. We've looked at a few things in that regard. Today we're going to go on to the second ingredient, and that is a forgiving spirit. That Daniel had a forgiving spirit. And when you look at Daniel and what had taken place in his life, we see that Daniel had a spirit that was evidently forgiving. I think of Daniel chapter 6, verse 21. And of course, if you're familiar with the story, Daniel, of course, had risen to power and prominence. He was a right-hand man of King Darius, and they plotted against Daniel. And they lied and they twisted things and got the king to sign a decree. Basically, they knew that Daniel was a man of prayer, and so they through that and this decree believed that they were going to be able to get Daniel. And of course, we know that Daniel was accused of breaking this law that was signed by the king and eventually was thrown into the lion's den. Now, I don't know about you, but I would, number one, probably be having a pretty big spiritual pity party about that time. I find that most people are not even willing to accept the results in their life when they've done wrong, let alone being done wrong and bad things happening in our life because we've done right. And that's exactly what happened to Daniel. Daniel did right. Daniel honored God. Daniel was faithful to his Lord. And now he finds himself being thrown into the lion's den. The story is not new to most of us, but of course God protected Daniel, calmed the lions. And the next morning, the king comes to Daniel in Daniel chapter number 6 and verse 21. And the king is seeking for Daniel's welfare. He's hoping that he's okay. And he cries out to Daniel there in the lion's den. And Daniel's response is a reflection of his attitude. Daniel says, "O king, live forever." It's a sign of respect. And here Daniel's giving respect to the king who had it in his power, one, to see that Daniel would not be put in this position, but he failed. But Daniel still had an attitude of respect and honor that he gave to the king. You see, having a forgiving spirit is a very important ingredient in having an excellent spirit. You're not going to live in this world surrounded by human beings that fail us and disappoint us and let us down. And we've become a very unforgiving people. And I believe that is directly attached to the fact that we are a people that are not willing to acknowledge our own sin. We have forgotten that we have had a great sin debt forgiven, and we are to also give forgiveness like God has given us forgiveness. Many want to experience the results of being forgiven, but yet don't graciously give the same forgiveness that they have been given to others. And I think one of the results of that is we become very judgmental of others because we don't practice regular acknowledgement of the fact that we are guilty sinners before God. And I believe that acknowledgement that we have sinned is one that causes us to understand that we have been forgiven much. And the Bible says, as we'll look in Luke chapter number 7 together here in a moment, that those who have been forgiven much loveth much. So what? They are also very understanding and gracious to others. And an unforgiving spirit is going to be something that causes your heart, your spirit, to be very bitter, to be very sour. Let's read in Luke chapter number 7. And we read verse number 36, and it says, "And one of the Pharisees desired him that he would eat with him." This is speaking of Jesus. "And he went into the Pharisee's house and sat down at meat. And behold, a woman in the city, which was a sinner. When she knew that Jesus sat at meat at the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment, and stood at his feet behind him weeping, and began to wash his feet with tears, and did wipe them with the hairs of her head, and kissed his feet, and anointed them with ointment. And now when the Pharisee, which had bidden him, saw it, he spake within himself, saying, This man, if he were a prophet, would know who and what manner of woman it is that toucheth him, for she is a sinner. And Jesus answered him." I love in the Bible where Jesus answers a critic's question when they haven't even verbalized it yet. As the Bible says here that he thought in his heart and he had not even verbalized it yet. And we see in verse number 40 now Jesus answers his question and says unto him, "Simon, I have somewhat to say unto thee." And he saith, "Master, say on." And he says, "There was a certain creditor which had two debtors. The one owed 500 pence and the other owed 50. And when he had nothing to pay, he frankly forgave them both. Tell me, therefore, which of them will love him most?" And Simon answered, "I suppose he to whom the most was forgiven." And he said unto him, "Thou hast rightly judged." Then he says this in verse number 44, "And he turned to the woman and said unto Simon, Seest thou this woman? I entered into thine house. Thou gavest me no water for my feet, but she washed my feet with tears, and wiped them with the hairs of her head. Thou gavest me no kiss, but this woman since the time I came in hath not ceased to kiss my feet. My head with oil thou didst not anoint, but this woman hath anointed my feet with ointment. Wherefore I say unto thee, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But to whom little is forgiven, the same loveth little. And he saith unto her, Thy sins are forgiven." We see here that Jesus is teaching a very important principle about forgiveness. I wonder today, Do you see yourself as a guilty sinner that has been forgiven a great debt? Or do you think that, yeah, God's done a nice thing for me and that He's forgiven me? Or do you realize that you have been forgiven a huge debt that you could not satisfy yourself before God? And so as we think of this and we start to look at the forgiving Spirit, I want to remind you, God has forgiven us of a great debt. Let's freely give forgiveness to others that we might enjoy an excellent spirit. I hope you were uplifted today. God bless you.
Steps of